Okay, what we need to do now is we have to look at some examples and how we work with negative indices. So the first one we'll look at is how we can rewrite a fraction with an index in it so that it now has a negative index. So we've got 1 over 3 to the power of 7 over here, and if we look at that, it's 1 over, and we've got a base of 3 and a power of 7, so we can rewrite that as 3 to the power negative 7. So if we look at another example, we've got 1 over 9 to the power 8, so we can rewrite that as 9 to the power negative 8. Our next example, we have a pronumeral in there now instead of a number as the base. So 1 over y to the power 4 can be written as y to the power negative 4. So that's the real basics of negative indices. But what if the numerator was not 1? Because at the moment we had fractions of 1 over. For instance, if we have now a fraction of 3 over m to the power 4, how can we rewrite that? Well, what we do is we separate the fraction a little bit. We change it to 3 times 1 over m to the power 4. So we bring that numerator out and we change it to a 1, and that numerator is now times in fraction with a 1 over. And then we change the fraction part. So we know now that 1 over m to the 4 is m to the minus 4. And with what we know with algebra, we no longer need that times sign in between. So we now have 3 times m to the negative 4. So let's try another one. We have over here the numerator of 2x over y cubed. So we'll separate that out. So let's now bring that numerator out and times and change that numerator to a 1. Now what we have is we now have 2x times y to the negative 3. And we can rewrite that as, without the times sign, 2x y to the negative 3. Alright, now we're going to go the opposite way. We're going to have a negative index to start off with, and we're going to rewrite this question so it now has a positive index. So 6 to the power negative 2, well, that can now be written as 1 over 6 squared, just like we did when we were working with our number patterns earlier. So we'll look at another example. V to the power negative 1. Well, we can rewrite that as 1 over v to the power 1. And we should know by now that we no longer have to have that 1 there as that power. So we can change that just to 1 over v. 1 over v is the more correct answer. So our next example makes it look a little bit more complicated because I've got a number multiplying out the front there. But if we separate that, so 8 times, and k to the negative 3, which we know can now be written as 1 over k cubed, and we can multiply that through, so 8 times 1 gives me that 8 in the numerator, and we now have 8 over k cubed. So you notice we almost have exactly the same as what we started with, except the k is now in the denominator, and the 3, instead of being negative, is now positive. So let's try another example. So we now have 8k, all of that is to the power of negative 3. So when it's negative 3, it's then going to be 1 over, and we take all of that, put it in the denominator, and it now has a positive index. So it's now positive 3. And from the work we were doing before, power of a power, I can share that power of 3 in with the 8 and that power of 3 in with the k. So I can simplify that a little bit more. And 8 to the power of 3 is 512, and then we've got k to the power of 3. So we'll have a look at one last example that's a little bit more involved. This time we've got a fraction to a negative index. So we'll have a look at what happens this time. So I'm going to change that. Can you notice what's happened? The 3 and the 5 have now swapped, and the index is no longer negative, it's now positive. So what do we call it when the numerator and denominator have swapped around? We call that the reciprocal. Okay, so we've got the reciprocal of the fraction that we started with, and now we have a positive index. We can take that a little bit further, because now we can share that index of 2 with the numerator, like we learned last lesson, and we can also share it with the denominator. And then we can even take that a bit further, because 5 squared is 25 and 3 squared is 9. Now if there was algebraic terms in there, we'd probably leave that as improper, but we know that with fractions without pronumerals we can then simplify a bit further, and we can take that to 2 7/9. So they're the basics of negative indices. So we'll have an exercise to do now.